Well, we're glad that you're here. If you've got a Bible, we're going to be in the book of Psalms, chapter 112. We kick off this series on target. We're going to spend a few weeks looking at what it means to live lives that hit the mark and that leave a legacy. I think there's something within all of us that we want to be remembered. I think it goes before that. First of all, we all want to be known. I think that's pretty much a universal thing. We want someone to know us, to recognize us, to remember our name, to know things about us. We have this desire for relationship, and it's just wired into us. God created us that way. But we want to be remembered when we're gone. We want to leave a legacy. As a pastor, I've been honored to preach many funerals, and in preparing for those funerals, many times it was someone that I didn't have a chance to know for very long. Sometimes I didn't know them at all. When I had the privilege to be a pastor in southeast Missouri, I was going to start, my first Sunday was going to be Easter Sunday, and so we arrived in town about a week before, and so on Good Friday, before Easter, before I'd ever preached my first message, I preached a funeral for a sister of one of our church members. I'd never met her. I'd never met him. He just called me and said, "Hey, my sister passed away. Would you preach the funeral?" I said, I would, I'd love to. And so I stepped into that role and to preach the funeral. But in preparing for that, you might be surprised that when you ask people, "So tell me about so-and-so. Tell me about them." And there might be like this hush across the room as they really have a hard time really sharing anything meaningful. And finally, someone might break through with something like, he really loved college football. And then that kind of breaks the ice. Everybody goes, "Oh yeah, he did kind of love college football," and they talk about stories about that. But then there are other situations where the stories they keep coming. It's just one meaningful story after another. And having been a pastor in those situations, I've often thought, man, when I die, I don't want the people who knew me to sit in a room and go, "He really liked some hobby." I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, okay? But I think most of us want to be known for something more than that. So as we open this series with that in mind, we're going to look at there's a few different ways that you can look at that. And so here's what I want to challenge you to do. Whatever stage of life you find yourself in right now, there's going to be something for you in that. And so like for me, I'm about to be 40, I'm married, I have 3 kids, so that's kind of my lens that I look at this through. But some of you, you're not yet married. Some of you are married, you don't have kids yet. Some of you are married and you've already had kids and they're grown and they're out. Some of you have great-grands. Wherever you are in this, just use that lens. Don't look at this and go, "Oh, that's for so-and-so." Because regardless of this, God wants us to live this kind of life that hits the mark He has for us. And if we do that, we're going to live a life that leaves a legacy. So let's look at the first 6 verses of Psalm 112. It says this: "Happy is the person who fears the Lord, taking great delight in His commands. His descendants," this is this legacy idea, okay, "will be powerful in the land. The generation of the upright will be blessed. Wealth and riches are in His house, and His righteousness endures forever. Light shines in the darkness for the upright. He is gracious, compassionate, and righteous. Good will come to the one who lends generously and conducts his business fairly. He will never be shaken." And then don't miss this: "The righteous one will be remembered forever." Remembered forever. That's a legacy. See, being remembered forever, that's more than your name on a building somewhere. That's more than even a scholarship endowed in your name. The righteous one, this person who lives this life, who hits the mark, they will be remembered forever. They're going to make a lasting impact, an eternal impact. There's a few ways we can think about this. I started thinking about it in the context of like a family business. Okay? Statistics show that it's really difficult actually, they say only about 10% of family businesses make it past the 3rd generation. The joke is that the first generation starts it, the second generation runs it, and the third generation ruins it. That's kind of how it goes. It's hard for it to make it past the third generation. And there's a few reasons for that. The first generation, it's all about this passionate pursuit, and it's marked by growth and leadership and prosperity. This can be seen with financial prosperity, but also with spiritual prosperity. First generation. The second generation is usually marked by preservation. They inherited something that they didn't make, they didn't create, they didn't necessarily earn, and so they appreciate it, but they didn't earn it, so there's this loss of drive and creativity. There is less of an appetite for risk, and so it's marked by preservation. Well, we've got this, we've got to keep it. We've got to honor the legacy of what was handed to us. And so they go into this preservation mode. And then the third generation is usually marked by decline. They've grown up only seeing a preservation mindset, an entrenchment mindset, and so there's no vision, there's no passion, there's no meaning. They often question the identity. It wasn't passed down, and so they reject the values that started it, and then it's decline. We can see this in a business. We can see this in churches. We can see this in churches. First generation marked by growth, passion. Second by preservation, and the third by decline. You see this in the Bible. Think about in the Old Testament. The first generation, I think about the children of Israel. And so you have them, they're brought out of Egypt under the leadership of Moses. And then he hands it off to Joshua, who is very much a first generation leader. And he leads them into the promised land. You guys, you may have heard of this story before. He leads them into the promised land. And that first generation it's strong. They're taking the promised land. In the second generation, they moved into a mindset of protecting what they had. Not as many problems. And their worship of God became half-hearted. And then by the third generation, they honestly rarely called on God. And why bother worshiping Yahweh? There are other gods all around us. They lost their identity. So much so that by Judges 21:25, it says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did whatever seemed right to him." That was the third generation. Do you know how many people I meet whose grandpa was a preacher? Like everybody. It seems like everybody's grandpa was a preacher. Third generation. God knew this would be the tendency. He knew this would be the tendency of the children of Israel. So he told them they had to be intentional as they moved into this land. We see it in Deuteronomy 6, the first 3 verses. "This is the command, the statutes and ordinances the Lord your God has commanded me to teach you, so that you may follow them in the land you're about to enter and possess." Get this. "Do this so that you may fear the Lord your God all the days of your life, by keeping all his statutes and commands I'm giving you, your son, your grandson." First generation, second generation, third generation. "So that you may have a long life. Listen, Israel, and be careful to follow them so that you may prosper and multiply greatly, because the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you a land flowing with milk and honey. Do this so you may have a long life." This isn't just about living to be an old person, living to old age. It was about multi-generational faith. God knew that their tendency would be that as they went in, they would go from this powerful, strong, following God, conquering mindset to preservation. Man, we've got it good. Let's enjoy the goodness that God has given us. And that by the third generation, they would have turned their back on God. This is a big part of where we're going to be going and what we're going to be talking about through this series. We want to leave a legacy. And I would challenge you with this. We can't, as individuals, say that we have fully hit the mark if we don't pass it on. We have come up short if we don't pass it on. So for the children of Israel, they came to a point where they had to choose between happiness or holiness. And holiness is just being set apart for God's purposes. It's not about being perfect. Only in Jesus Christ are we ever made perfect. It's about being set apart for God's purposes. So they had to choose happiness or holiness. And a big part, a key part, foundational part of multi-generational faith is making the most of our time on earth and hitting the mark and leaving a legacy. The foundational part of that is intentionality. What are we going to choose to pursue with our lives? We lack that. Our tendency becomes to make decisions that we believe will bring us happiness. The Israelites failed to prepare the next generation. They settled into the good things of life. They made treaties with the people around them who worship false gods. Even though God had made it very clear that, hey, I don't want your children to marry outside, and it wasn't because of racism, it was because they worshiped false gods, and he knew what would happen. He knew that if you allowed your daughters to marry, and if you allowed your sons to take wives from people who worship false gods, that they would begin to decline. They would begin to look away from the one true God. And this is exactly what happened. They didn't possess the fullness of the promise of what God had for them. They compromised because they would rather have happiness than holiness. But we're kind of like, we're in the American church, and honestly just Americans in general, we're wired to pursue happiness, right? It's in our DNA as Americans, right? The pursuit of happiness. But there's such foolishness in the pursuit of happiness because happiness is a moving target. If our aim is happiness, it's a moving target. Am I right? What made you happy 10 years ago doesn't make you happy today. So, well, no, I mean, I was younger then and things have changed. Yeah, but the happiness, honestly, happiness, that target can move from day to day, can it? It can move from hour to hour. You ever gotten something that made you happy and then the longer you had it, you grew weary with it? Man, things change so fast today, you can't find happiness, and it's a moving technology. Like, we love the latest and greatest. I've got the iPhone 8. But then there's a new one that comes out. And I haven't even paid for this one yet. And the happiness is gone. It's a moving target. And here's the truth. Happiness is a byproduct. It's a byproduct of a life. It cannot be the goal of a life, the aim of a life. We want happy families, happy children, a happy life, so we pursue happiness. Happiness is found in a satisfaction with the present, whatever that is. So anytime we pursue it, it's always going to be short-sighted because what makes us happy changes. So we can't pursue happiness over holiness. But let me challenge you with this. I think our pursuit should really be readiness over happiness. Are we ready? Are we prepared? Instead of pursuing happiness in the moment, we pursue readiness for the future. What if we approached our lives as though we were preparing to possess what God had in store for us? Like, we've got it good. Some of you, your life right now, it's way better than you ever thought it would be. God has given you more than you thought you would have. You've got an amazing family, a loving wife, gorgeous children, a job where you feel like you're making a difference and you're making money. Like, you've got it pretty good. But what if you realized that what God wanted you to do was more than that momentary thing? That all of this was preparing us, and it should be preparing us to live in the future for what God has for us and preparing the next generation to lead and to live in the future, to possess the eternal promises and the eternal goodness of God. Are we ready? Are they? Psalm 112 describes a person whose life hit the mark. They're remembered forever. A person whose life left a legacy. The person of Psalm 112 walked through life ready for whatever came next. He made the most of the opportunities given, and it says he lives with no fear. Let me show you this. We stopped in verse 6. Let's go to verse 7. He will not fear bad news. His heart is confident, trusting in the Lord. His heart is assured. He will not fear. In the end, he will look in triumph on his foes. Readiness produces confidence. If we're going to live a life that hits the mark and that leaves a legacy, we're going to have to be intentional about getting ready. And when we are, it produces this confidence in us. The person of Psalm 112, the man and the woman, they don't fear the future. It says they don't fear bad news. Does that mean that bad news doesn't come? No, they just don't fear it. They don't fear it. They're not going to be dictated by it. They're living in fear because they have confidence. He doesn't fear the future. He's ready. He feels confident, this unshakable confidence. It's not fleeting and it's not false confidence. This entire psalm is centered on the results of the life of a man who fears the Lord. Let me challenge you to do this. Don't do it now, but this week, I want you to go back and I want you to read Psalm 111, and then I want you to read Psalm 112. They both have 10 verses. If you can, print them out and read them verse 1 side by side. Verse 10 of Psalm 111 says this, and this isn't on the screen. It says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. All who follow his instructions have good insight." The fear of the Lord. And then we start chapter 112, which says this: "Happy is the person who fears the Lord, taking great delight in his commands." And then verse 7 says, "He will not fear bad news. His heart is confident." Why? Because he trusts in the Lord. Your confidence is dictated by where you place your trust. Your readiness will produce this confidence in you, but that confidence ultimately comes from where you're placing your trust. Think about anything else that you have prepared for in your life. Maybe it was a test, and you prepared and you studied, and you walked into it feeling confident. This past Friday, our youngest son was going to have a spelling test, and we had been working with him on the spelling words, okay? So Friday morning, we're like, "Hey, Will, Sarah said, do you want to go back over your spelling words?" And he was like, "No." He wasn't worried about it. We were worried. We're like, "Dude, you're not ready. Like, you have this confidence in you, and you're not ready." And so we picked him up from school, and we said, "How did you do on it?" He says, "I got them all right." And I thought, "Man, good job." And then we looked at it. Guess what? He didn't get them all right. He felt ready. He felt confident. He shouldn't have been either one of those things. He wasn't ready. He should not have been confident. Right now, there are some of us that we fear the future. We fear the bad news. Some of you lived your whole adult life that way, maybe even your childhood, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Why is my life so hard? Why is my life so? No confidence, because where are you placing your trust? I don't know. Is it in here? Is it in me? This isn't a false confidence, and it's certainly not any sort of self-confidence. That's the thing about the man, the woman described in Psalm 112. He's long remembered, one translation says. He's always remembered forever. He has all this, it seems to have all this success. It says there's wealth in his house. Doesn't ever say anything about confidence in self. Trust in the Lord. And don't miss this, verse 1. Happy is the person who fears the Lord. Happiness is a byproduct. And it's a byproduct of fearing the Lord. That's really where happiness is going to be found. Living a life that hits the mark begins with a confidence that only comes from trusting in God. And this is more than simply obeying the commands of God. It says that he takes delight in them. And so don't miss this. Your trust is indicated by the level of your delight. I won't ask you to raise your hand, but we would all feel obligated to. How many of you trust in the Lord? Well, I got to raise my hand, right? Trust in the Lord. Here's what trusting in the Lord looks like. Delighting in his commands. Happy is the person who fears the Lord, taking great delight in his commands. So what's the difference between just regular old delight and great delight? I don't know. I think it looks a whole lot like a joyful obedience. You can fake it and still obey. But you can't fake delight. You can't. You can force a smile onto your face and do what you feel like you have to do. But you can't fake delight. If you don't love what God tells you to do, you don't trust him completely. There's a part of you that's looking at what he is telling you to do, looking at his commands and his laws, and you're saying, I don't know that that's what's best for me in this situation. Okay, God, like this was written thousands of years ago. You don't understand what I'm going through right now. A lack of delightful, joyful obedience shows that there is a lack of complete, wholehearted trust. Because you don't believe that it's really what's best for you. You don't believe that he really has your best in mind. You think you know something he doesn't. You think you know better about how to live your life. If you don't trust in him completely, you're not going to have joyful obedience. And without that, you're not going to have unshakable confidence. Because as awesome as you may be, and as awesome as you may think you are, you're never going to completely trust in yourself. Because you have let you down. How many times have you decided, I'm never going to do that again? That's it. I'm done. I'm never doing it again. And then you did it again. You lied to you. You can't trust you. If you're honest with yourself, why would you put confidence in yourself? All yourself has ever done is ultimately let you down. So I can't trust me. Maybe I should trust him or her. But even though they're well-meaning and even though they may love you, they let you down. So I can't have confidence in me, and I can't really have confidence in you because you can't even take care of you. Our level of trust is indicated by the level of our delight, our wholehearted obedience. If you don't have that confidence, you're not ready. You don't even feel ready. If you're not ready, how can you expect to hit the mark? How can you expect to make a difference? How can you expect to impact the next generation? How can you expect to leave a legacy, to be remembered forever? Some of you are honestly, if you're completely honest, you're saying, I don't know that I want to be remembered at all. I don't know that there's anything worth remembering here. But that is not the life that God calls us to live. God wants us to be these men and women who are delighting in the commands of the Lord and who are living this out. So let me invite you to pray with me. And as just bow your heads and close your eyes for just a moment. And let me pray some scripture over you, okay? God, make us the men and women of these verses. Happy is the person who fears the Lord, taking great delight in your commands. That our descendants will be powerful in the land, that the next generation, the generation of us as we live upright in your sight, will be blessed. That wealth and riches would be in our house, and that our righteousness would endure forever. The light would shine in the darkness for us. That we would be gracious, compassionate, and righteous. Father, your word says that good will come to the one who lends generously, conducts his business fairly. We will never be shaken. The righteous ones will be remembered forever. We will not fear bad news. Our heart is confident, trusting in you, that our hearts would be assured and that we will not fear. And in the end, we will look in triumph on any who oppose us, that we will distribute freely to the poor, that our righteousness will endure forever, that horn will be exalted in honor, and that those who don't know you will look on us and that they will be amazed. God, make us those people. Help us to hit the mark you have set for us. Help us to be ready and to make ready the next generation. Father, not all of us are parents or even grandparents, but it doesn't matter. We all have a responsibility for the generations that come after us. God, as we make our way through this series, help us to listen as mothers and fathers and grandparents and single adults and high school and college students. Help us to take delight in your law, to walk upright in your sight and in a world that would pull us down and pull us to the right and to the left. Father, give us confidence that comes from placing our whole and complete trust in you. And by your mighty power at work in and through us, give us a legacy. Not for our glory, but for yours alone, Jesus. We pray it in your name. Amen.